The grandfather of our speaker once asked, "What does he have against living?" The first time that question arose was when he set the family basement on fire while attempting to manufacture homemade rockets. The University of Washington scientists placed bets as to when his luck would run out on high-risk field assignments. He narrowly escaped death in several volcanic eruptions, was head-butted by a killer whale, and fell through crevasses while mountain climbing. If such experiences seem to be the stuff of books, he's written 4 of them. Has received 9 Emmys for his television work in a career that has spanned 40 years. Our speaker is not impervious to nerves or stress. Rather, his curiosity and zest for life has led him to seek ways to transform it. So please welcome Jeff Renner on a journey behind the blast zone, transforming stress into confident performances and relationship building on cue. He'll not share his recipe for rocket engines.
Do you know what you call a sunny day in Western Washington? Any day but Saturday or Sunday, today notwithstanding. Still, it was one of those rare Sundays in spring that was sunny, and the morning quiet was so peaceful until it was interrupted by an urgent radio call. Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. 5 words that would mark the beginning of the biggest natural disaster in the recorded history of the Pacific Northwest. May 18th, 1980. At 8:32 in the morning, a magnitude 5 earthquake shattered the north face of Mount St. Helens. 1,300 vertical feet of rock, that's twice the height of the Space Needle, crumbled and collapsed. It was like popping the cork on a bottle. Superheated magma exploded horizontally, leveling and incinerating everything over 234 square miles. That intense heat flash melted centuries-old glaciers, the torrents of meltwater generating mud flows the consistency of wet cement. Moving at freeway speeds, they obliterated everything in their way. And just 18 minutes after that eruption began, just 18 minutes, the ash cloud had reached 80,000 feet, twice the cruising altitude of a transoceanic jet. It was my job, and that of my crew, to fly beneath that ash, to stay above the mud flows, to dodge flying debris, rocks, and to get as close to that erupting volcano as we possibly could in what was aptly named the blast zone. We were told to keep an eye out for survivors and bodies, and we would find both. I was preparing for my first broadcast, and my engineer stepped up to me, handed me a small slip of paper, and said very quietly, "This is the latest estimate of the number of missing and presumed dead." And then in a whisper before he turned away, he said, "I'm told we'll know some of the names of the victims." That hit me like a punch to the gut. My lungs tightened up, my heart started to rise in my throat, my mouth got as dry as sun-baked sand. I developed a headache. I felt a sense of disconnect with where I was or what I was supposed to do. But I had no time for that. Stand by. 5, 4, dozens of people killed in this eruption. 3, 2, who do I know among the dead? 1, you're on. Some days later, when I had a chance to watch recordings, I was frankly amazed that there was almost no outer reflection of the inner stress, the turmoil, the emotional pain that I was feeling at the time that I went on the air. Emotional training, or rather professional training, professional experience, and also focus not only helped extract me from that physical blast zone earlier that day, but it also helped me remove myself from that emotional blast zone that was going on in my mind. Stress is not an option when you do live television, and I suspect that's true for what many of you do as well. It's a given. The option is going to be, how do you respond to it? Now, stress, it's important to recognize, is not necessarily a bad thing. You experience stress when something or someone you care about is being threatened, or so you believe. It motivates you to action. But if you don't transform, if you don't neutralize that stress, if you don't get a break from it or some assistance, it begins to impact you in your body, in your mind, and also in your spirit. In fact, the National Institutes of Health tells us that 1 of 3 Americans at some point in their life will experience anxiety disorders, and that proportion is likely to increase. We don't notice life getting more relaxing, do we? Not in my case. What I would say is that although none of you are likely to be called on to fly into an erupting volcano, when others very wisely are flying out, or to broadcast to close to 500,000 people seconds after you receive emotionally devastating news, I am willing to wager that each of you have had volcanic eruptions of your own in your own life. I am willing to wager that each of you have felt some of those same physical symptoms that I described at different times in your life. And I am willing to wager that some of you, most of you, all of you, have had that reach a point where you thought it's going to impact my ability to creatively and confidently perform and relate to others as part of the requirements, not only of my job, but just in living, that it might push you to the edge, if not even over. I know, I've been there. It is very useful in learning how to deal with these situations to have a metaphor, a mind model, not only for the challenges that you face, but also for the ways to respond to them. My favorite one is a radio. A quick story. My first paying job in broadcasting, and it wasn't paying much, was doing the news in a small FM radio station. The format was easy listening. Research showed that most of our viewers, most of our listeners were older adults who loved to set their radios for a calm wake-up in the morning. 7 o'clock one morning. The sweet strains of a string quartet had barely faded when in stepped and interrupted the syrupy voice of an announcer who said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the management of this station have ascertained that to better serve our community, we are going to change our call letters and our format from WTMJ-FM to WKTI Super Rock around the clock." The speakers literally shook with the supercharged hard rock rhythms of Steppenwolf. Sookie, 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 soo! And then, get your motor running. Head out on the highway. I promise I won't sing anymore. The switchboards lit up brighter than the neon lights above a cheap, sketchy used car lot. The listeners were not amused. And guess who got to answer those calls? I did. There were the angry ones. What do you think you're doing to my station? There were those that were almost in tears. Why would you do this? And then there are the ones that I can best describe as being truly memorable. Young man, the last thing I want at 7 o'clock in the morning is for my husband to get his motor running. I'm sure she had a point. I didn't ask for further elaboration. What I think that offered, though, is a very useful metaphor. What do you think those people did when that radio station switched formats? They changed stations. They said, this message, this programming no longer fits my needs. It is not going to allow me to become the person I want to be. So they changed stations. And that's the first of 5 steps that I would offer you to transforming the stress for confidence performance in your life. Step number 1 is dissociate yourself from your feelings. Don't deny them, but don't say, I am angry, I am afraid, I am overwhelmed. Say, I am feeling angry, I am feeling afraid, I am feeling overwhelmed. You are not your feelings. You are not your emotions. You have feelings and emotions, but do not let them have you. Step number 2 is to slow down. Start to counteract that biochemical stew of stress hormones that are speeding through your body. You do that by breathing in, slowly, now all the way into your belly. Don't worry if it puffs out. These photographers are not here to shoot us for a swimsuit edition for GQ or Victoria's Secret. Fully into your belly. Breathe in, and then breathe out through your mouth. Continue that process as you work into the next step, and that's step number 3. Step number 3 is to, as you breathe in, tense certain muscles, contract them in your body. Your legs, your thighs, your stomach, your shoulders, your arms, and if no one's watching, maybe even your face. That will again counteract those stress hormones that are flushing through your body. Step number 4, as you start to counteract that, is to reconnect with a larger environment around you. Do that through vision first. I like to look down at the floor, a friendly face out there, this room is full of them, and maybe if you've got a smartphone with a favorite screensaver, look at that. Something to generate favorite good, positive emotions. And breathe in and breathe out with each change. Step number 5 is to do it with hearing, ambient sound. This room is very silent. With your own deep rhythmic breathing. That will relax you. And the third thing to do is maybe hum a favorite tune. I would personally not recommend get your motor running. That's just me. Did you notice that each one of these steps are things you focus on? Focus is part of the equation. It's not the only equation. And so I'd like to end as I began, and that was with the story of Mount St. Helens. Remember I mentioned to you that an engineer handed me a slip of paper? Well, by the end of the day, they handed me another slip of paper, and it had this number on it. 57, the number of men and women that perished in the volcanic eruption. And one of the names on that list was the name of a friend of mine, Dr. David Johnston, the U.S. Geological Survey scientist that called in the alert, Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it, seconds before he was blasted off his mountaintop observation post. Dave's body, to this day, has never been found. 2.5 months later, I walked into a small suburban Chicago coffee shop to meet with Dave's dad. I was carrying a lot of emotional baggage. Emotional baggage from what I'd seen, what I tried to come to terms with, and survivor's guilt, quite frankly. I had numerous close calls. I had no right to be there, to be here today, but I was. But how do you explain that to the father of someone who did die in that eruption? I didn't know. We had a very heartfelt and healing discussion. Toward the end, he looked at me and he shook his head and he said, "You know, Jeff, part of me wishes I had never encouraged David's interest in geology." But he said I couldn't have done that. David used to say to me that, "Dad, each day for me is an adventure. Each day is an opportunity to learn something new, to use that knowledge to get better at something that I do, and to use that knowledge and that skill to help other people." I've remembered that ever since then. What I would invite each and every one of you to do is to recognize that perhaps David's biggest legacy was his vision. Now, he could focus with laser accuracy, what I call microscope vision, to solve a scientific problem. But he recognized that wasn't sufficient. It's not a place you want to dwell. After all, if you look at a smudge no bigger than the fingernail on your pinky, that makes me giggle just to say that, under a microscope, are you going to see anything else? It's going to obscure everything else. But you expand your vision, what I call telescope vision, and those little smudges will shrink down to size. So as you leave, I would invite you to adopt the same motto that I did after talking with David's dad in Chicago so many years ago. And that is to look at life with a spirit of thankfulness. Thankfulness for the things that morning that are going right in your life. Thankful for the opportunity to change the things that are not going right in your life. That's a power, and you don't have to do it by yourself. David transported me, and I think he's transporting many people, from me to we, to building bridges, and for looking for ways to go ahead and expand the possibilities of our life. If you do that, as I've found over the last 38 years, that it reduces the stresses to mere smudges on the giant lens of life. And those are stresses you can wipe away. Thank you.